Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today for our Lunch and Learn Native Plants and Companions in Your Vegetable Garden. My name is Michelle Diaz. I'm Trees Atlanta Education Program Manager, and I'll be the moderator for today's class. Trees Atlanta mission is to improve and protect Trees Atlanta's forest by planting, conservation, and education. We offer educational programs like this one year round, so I invite you to check out our website to learn more about the upcoming tours and talks that we will be offering. This will be an interactive virtual class, so please feel free to use the chat feature and the Q&A to submit your questions. And Sam, the speaker today, will be looking at them, and he will be also answering them at the end of the presentation. When the webinar is done, you will be looking into a survey. Please let us know your feedback. How can we improve these classes? And also if there's any other topics that you might want us to suggest to us so we can explore that in the future. We will love your feedback, and you will also receive a survey email later on for the feedback. How can you stay connected with Trees Atlanta? Take a look at our website, treesatlanta.org, submit and sign up for our newsletter, and also please follow us on social media. And then today's speaker is Sam Carden. He is the Beltline lead, and he is specifically working on the West Side Trail. And you'll be learning a lot from Sam today. So thank you, Sam, for your time. And I hope everybody enjoyed the presentation.
Hey, I'd just like to start off by thanking you all for coming today. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, and I'd love to share everything I've learned however I can. I'd also like to thank Michelle. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for facilitating this. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. And let's dive right in. So my presentation today is entitled Native Wildflowers as Garden Companions, Incorporating Native Plants of the Georgia Piedmont into Your Garden. So once again, my name is Sam Carton. I am the, here we go. I'm a senior lead on the West Side Beltline, and what we do on the West Side Beltline, you can see in the pictures here, we do native species restoration, specifically with grasses, and we try to have like a balance of wildflowers in there in between the hundreds and hundreds of tree plantings that Trees Atlanta has done through our Urban Trees division. The reason why we try to have the balance of the grassland to the forest habitat is that's really where you get a lot of biodiversity of animal life. When you have the balance of the habitat, like say, for example, there's a lot of animals that specifically need the balance of the grassland, the forest habitat to really fulfill all of their functions. And as you can see here on the right, this is really an example of how I think we do a good job of balancing the ecological function with aesthetic appeal, especially in the springtime. You can see a few different blooms here. I'll try and point them out. Flowers we might talk about later. These red and yellow blooms down there, that's Gaillardia pulchella, a common name Indian blanket flower. These yellow blooms, that's going to be Lanceleaf coreopsis, a great perennial. And these white columnal blooms, that's going to be Virginia sweetspire, a really nice perennial shrub. And I think all of these species working together is a really good encapsulation of what we do. We like to maximize biodiversity. And let's talk a little bit about that. So first, I just kind of like to break down, before I dive into all the wildflowers I'm going to talk about today, I just kind of like to give a brief overview, maybe not as brief as it could be, of why we do native species restoration. Why is native species restoration important? And long story short, the reason is native plant species bolster insect populations. So this picture on the left here, this is a graph from a study done by Doug Tallamy. You can see the name at the bottom left. Doug Tallamy is a professor of entomology and ecology at the University of Delaware, just the native species restoration guy. We'll talk a little bit about him later, but in this graph, you can see the findings. This column on the left, that is the biomass that they recorded in a native hedgerow. On the right, that's the biomass they recorded in an invaded hedgerow. So these two pictures over here on the right, let's start with the bottom. Ligustrum sinensis, Chinese privet. This is like the poster child of an invasive hedge species. So this is a species that we brought over for ornamental reasons. This species works really well as a hedge, and birds will eat the berries, the plant goes feral, and it's really a very aggressive invasive species. Up here on the top, this is two really good examples, I would say, of native hedge species. Right here, you see the tiger swallowtail butterfly pollinating the Calocarpa americana, common name American beautyberry, really just a wonderful shrub that is native to the Atlanta-Piedmont region, all across the Southeast, really. Up in the top left, you can kind of see another good example, the Virginia sweet spire, Itea virginica. And this is actually the same, if you recall, the white blooms in the picture before, this is the same plant. This is a little further. This picture was taken in the summer, whereas this shrub blooms in the spring. So let's break down that factor a little more. Why is that important? Why do we care that why do we care that insect populations are decreasing? Well, look at what our ecologists have to say around the world. Here's a few headlines. From The Guardian: insect apocalypse poses risks to all life on Earth. Conservation is warned. Report claims 400,000 insect species face extinction amid heavy use of pesticides. While this article talks, it's focused on pesticides, I would argue that the use of pesticides and our conventional landscaping paradigm are, inexorably linked. This up here on the top right, the Deutsche Welle article, Why Biodiversity Loss Hurts Humans as Much as Climate Change. Subtitle, a UN-backed report says 1 million species are at risk of extinction, warns biodiversity loss and failure to conserve ecosystems has catastrophic effect on people as well as nature. And then down here on the bottom right, you kind of see a parallel effect to the insect collapse. NPR article, North America has lost 3 billion birds, scientists say. And if you look at what birds have to eat in their diet, you can see that when we lose insect populations, higher orders of animal life are going to be affected. All right, so going back to why we plant native, how these factors are all related. Native species support higher rates of specialized pollinators and larval hosts. So when talking about this, I like to use the example of a children's book I read. Some of you might be familiar, Very Hungry Caterpillar. It's a really beautifully animated children's book. Wonderful book to read to your kids, very misleading. The reason why, in that children's book, this caterpillar, he'll eat, tomatoes, leaves, garbage, pizza. This caterpillar eats everything. In reality, a vast majority of caterpillars, larvae of butterflies and moths, they're specialists. So they're not just going to be able to eat any leaf. They're going to only be able to eat the select species, maybe a few genera, one genus or two, rather than any leaf they come across. And this is because these insects have evolved alongside these plants for so long. Another aspect up here on the top right, this is a picture of a hairy sunflower in the Helianthus genus. I chose this picture because flowers in the sunflower family are actually really important for native bees. Some bees, in the same way that caterpillars will only eat a few insects, or rather a few leaves. These bees, they depend on the specific type of pollen and nectar from these flowers for their life cycle. And down here, I just chose on the bottom right, a picture of a mama cardinal and just sort of tying together the whole insect life to higher orders of animal life. This mama cardinal is feeding a caterpillar to herd babies. And especially in the springtime when birds are raising their families, these high protein caterpillars are very important. So that kind of leads me into the main point of my presentation. and would be this: selecting the diversity of native flowers and grasses for our individual landscapes is an effective way to bolster ecological balance and create beneficial habitat, not only for our gardens, but for our citywide ecosystem. So definitely an aspect that I want to highlight in this presentation is how, in the same way that planting these native species can help our ecology as a whole, it can also be advantageous for us for designing like a holistic garden system. And I'd be more than happy to break that into. I'm going to go into maybe about 20 different species of wildflower and then some grasses at the end. But first, I just like to break down this picture. So up here in the top, these scarlet blooms, this is scarlet bee balm, really, really eye-catching flower, really gorgeous. Asclepias tuberosa over here in the orange, we'll talk about each of these, of course, but just to kind of give you a primer. Butterfly weed, the larval host plant of the monarch butterfly. Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower right here. And then the bottom, you can see Achillea millefolium, that's yarrow. So just once again, tying this into my use of these plants to help to be companion plants for a vegetable garden. This picture was taken at the Hartnett Community Garden, kind of on the backside of Wawa, West Atlanta Watershed Alliance property. And you can't really see the whole garden, but this is in one raised bed out of maybe 12. So I dedicated this bed entirely to these deep-rooted perennial wildflowers, just sort of as a show of, hey, this is, an example. I think we should dedicate space to these flowers to benefit the whole health of the garden. For anyone looking for additional resources on native landscaping, I mentioned Doug Tallamy before. These are two books that are very popular by him: Nature's Best Hope, Bringing Nature Home. If you're looking for something a little faster, if anyone is a podcast listener like myself, you can just type his name into any podcast search function. You'll have a litany of interviews from him, very insightful. For anyone looking for more like specialized approach of like, okay, I'm in Atlanta, what plants can work for me, I would recommend another Trees Atlanta workshop, From Lawns to Native, and that is hosted by one of our all-star volunteers, Scott Braslow, and you can find that on our website. All right, so before I dive in just to all of the individual wildflowers and grasses, I just like to kind of have a brief pause, see if anyone had any questions they just want to enter into the chat so we don't have to wait for all of our questions to the end. And it looks like we're good on the chat function, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. So this first flower we're going to be talking about is partridge pea, one of my favorites, Chamaecrista fasciculata, the scientific name. You can see gorgeous yellow blooms. This plant blooms in the mid-summer to late summer. It's actually in bloom right now for anybody in Atlanta. A really low growing, it really functions well as a ground cover. It gets maybe about 3, possibly 4 feet tall, dense growth. And one thing that I really like about this plant, you see this picture on the right, looks like this like ball of nectar. This is what we call an extrafloral nectary. So this plant, not only does it release carbohydrates from its flowers to attract insects, it sends carbohydrates down through its roots to feed soil biology. It also releases sugar just at the base of each leaf. You can see up close right there. The reason why is that this plant benefits from attracting these insects and that will eat the nectar. You see a lot of ants, a lot of ladybugs, a lot of wasps. Yes, the wasps are really good for your garden, as much as I might not like to admit it. And they also benefit the health of the partridge pea itself. It has a lot of herbivorous insects that will eat it. And by attracting in the sugar, you'll bring in the predators that will limit the populations of the partridge pea's predators. And that function really works well for your garden as a whole. So if you plant this right next to, say, a fruit tree, not only do you have the positive impact of the beneficial insect attraction, another key function of this plant, you can see the arrangement of its leaves and the dark green leaflets, let alone the shape of the flower and the little bean pods. This plant is in the Fabaceae family, the pea family, a family of plant life well known for its nitrogen fixation properties. So this is a plant, everybody in its family has developed a symbiosis with subterranean bacteria called Rhizobia, in the genus Rhizobia, that fix nitrogen effectively into the soil. And is a really good example of plants that you can have around your garden that will benefit soil biology as a whole, especially going back to, say, if you wanted to plant this underneath a fruit tree, kind of like in a row, not right up to the base, of course. This will have a positive impact for all the plants around it. Moving on, we have the sunflower genus, Helianthus. I chose 3 examples here, just because it's a very broad family. Let's start with the top right. Helianthus tuberosa, sunchoke, for some of you might be familiar with the name Jerusalem artichoke. This is actually a sunflower that produces edible tubers. That really, really an interesting vegetable. I will definitely give the disclaimer, this is a very tall plant. All members in this genus, these are very tall plants. They will get upwards of like 6, 8, 9 feet. This is obviously sunflowers, they love the sun. So this is a plant that might have very specific spatial requirements. To the left here, but just to once again note the diversity of this genus, we have swamp sunflower, Helianthus angustifolius. This is a great plant for if, say, you're planting a rain garden or you have really a poorly drained, like low-lying area of your yard. This is a species that will really thrive in that environment. Down here in the bottom right, this is of course the well-known annual sunflower, well known for the seeds, a diversity of different cultivars. This is a great plant to really work into, say, a crop rotation. Once again, it's important to note the distinction between perennials, swamp sunflower on the left and sunchoke up on the top. These are perennials. You will put these plants in the ground. They will grow for years and years. An annual sunflower, it will reproduce once, produce a massive amount of seeds, and then that plant is dead. Another really cool plant for insect attraction, they also have extrafloral nectar. It's not quite as noticeable as the partridge pea, but they release sugars in the back of the flower head. You see a lot of ants crawling up this plant. And this is also a really good example of a trap crop. A lot of the times in late summer, you will get up and personal with the sunflower, you'll see a lot of aphids on it or other insects. And sunflowers, they just grow so fast and aggressively, they can really take the insect damage. It's a good way to draw insect pressure away from possibly some more fragile plants in your garden. Moving on, we have Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower. One of my favorite flowers on the right, you can see here the straight species, just the normal genetics. Such a vibrant orange and the pink combination, and a pretty decent bloom period. This is a plant, depending on when you get it in the ground, depending on how old it is as well, will dictate when exactly it blooms or how often. Sometimes we'll get multiple blooms of this plant throughout a season, ranging from mid to early spring, even now to late summer. A really spatially compatible plant, not too big. Echinacea, I've never seen get more than 4 feet. A good general rule for these wildflowers, the shadier the environment that you put them in, the leggier we call it, or the taller they get. They're kind of reaching up for sun. So it's important to note, like if you have a sunnier location, this plant will grow a little more squat to the ground. A litany of herbal applications. This plant has a long history of use in indigenous American medicinal practices. You can see this plant in any number of herbal teas in your health food store. So a really good example of a multifunctional plant. Not only do you have that one striking visual appeal, you have the harvest aspect of, you can use the roots of this plant, say in a tea. You have the beneficial insect attraction. And it's also just a plant that, once again, going back to the spatial compatibility, is a very multi-purpose, flexible plant. And I chose this picture on the left. You can see the different color of the blooms. This is what we call a nativar, or a native cultivar, cultivar of a native species. This specific example, Cheyenne Spirit. I just kind of wanted to break down Trees Atlanta. We sell a lot of cultivars, and a lot of times there's a reason for it I'll get into later. But I will say and especially in this example, I'm partial to the straight species. Doug Tallamy talks in a lot of his lectures. When you are modifying the pigmentation of a plant, a lot of the times you're not only diminishing the capacity, say, for this plant to provide nectar to insects, which is the example in this case, you're making it harder for insects to find this plant. And especially when you get into modifications of, say, the leaf colors, you're changing the chemical makeup of the leaves, which can potentially have a negative impact on plants that want to use this, negative impact on insects that want to use this plant as a larval host. And but once again, I do want to say we sell a lot of nativars at Trees Atlanta, and there's a few examples that I am a fan of, which we will delve into later. Pygnanthemum pilosum, hairy mountain mint. There's a number of different species in the Pygnanthemum genus that are native to the Piedmont region. But this species is the one that I have found will germinate the best and can really tolerate the Piedmont climate. Really an aromatic plant. This is one you see in my plantings in the West Side Beltline. I would say this is by far the most aromatic plant we have. A member of the mint family, of course, as you can tell. And just really, let alone, you can see on the right, when this plant is in full bloom, very irresistible to insects. Similar to Echinacea, you have the capacity to harvest the leaves and the flowers of this plant, say in an herbal tea, a very soothing, very aromatic tea. And linking it back to using plants as companion plants, I've always heard that if you plant these strong, minty, aromatic plants right next to, say, something that a deer might want to munch on, like your tomatoes, you can maybe diminish the capacity for your deer to find plants planted around this mint attractive. Now, I don't really have any like hard scientific evidence to back that up, but that's just, old farm knowledge. Moving on, we have Passiflora incarnata, passion flower. Really one of my favorite vines, as you can see on the picture on the right. This is a vine. Very important to consider when and where you plant this. It's a great plant, I would say, for like a back fence in your property. This plant will grow and climb. Once it's established, it can be very aggressive. But going back to the picture I showed y'all earlier of the Gulf fritillary larva eating the leaves, this is a plant that whenever I've seen this plant fully established, I will always see caterpillars on this, specifically the caterpillar of the Gulf fritillary. And I just see them, they will take a well-established vine like this picture and they will just like tear it down, rip it down. A lot of people might ask, like, well, why do you want to plant a plant that you know is going to get eaten by insects? The obvious answer is because you'll see like hundreds of butterflies around your garden if you have a well-established passiflora. Over here on the right, rather the left, I know my directions, you see these just exquisite, just beautiful flowers, really good pollinator forage. You see a lot of bumblebees get in these flowers, and the fruit as well, important for diversity of animals. I will definitely give the disclaimer, this isn't going to give you that like sparkly sweet tropical passion fruit if you're looking for growing this vine for the fruit itself. I've heard of people drying this fruit, maybe using it in teas. This isn't going to be that sweet succulent fruit. I grow this plant primarily for the visual aspect and also to draw in those butterflies. Asclepias tuberosa, on the topic of planting plants to bring in the larva of butterflies. This is the larval host plant for the monarch butterfly, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware is in massive population decline for a number of reasons, but a big reason being loss of habitat of the Asclepias genus, to which the butterfly is extremely dependent on. And there are a couple of other species in the Asclepias genus, but I chose tuberosa just to single in on. This is a very spatially compatible plant, a very easy plant to kind of squeeze into multiple places in a landscape design due to it being a shorter plant. So butterfly weed, I'll never really see more than 2 or 3 feet tall. And really great to kind of plug in around borders in your landscape, whereas other species, say common milkweed, Asclepias syriaca, this plant, you know, it has a beautiful flower, but it can be very tall, harder to really fit into a landscape or a garden design. And not only is this a great plant for attracting the butterflies, the larvae of monarchs, the flowers of which are really irresistible to a lot of different native bee species. And I do have a little story. In the picture that I showed of the flower bed at the Hartnett Community Garden, one day I was kind of, you know, just weeding it, and I noticed a butterfly that was pretty much just cut in half. And I kind of scanned my eyes up a little higher, and I see probably one of the biggest praying mantis I've ever seen, really just kind of camouflaged in there. Because if anyone is familiar with or milkweeds, their seed pods, they kind of have these long cylindrical shapes, and the praying mantis was perfectly camouflaged. The abdomen of the praying mantis was indistinguishable from one of these seed pods. So I'm a firm believer that this is a great plant to bring in those beneficial predators. Praying mantises will eat all kinds of pests in your garden. Achillea millefolium, yarrow, another plant with a diversity of herbalist applications. This is also a very spatially compatible plant. You can have this plant established in a garden bed, plug in a tomato in the springtime, and this plant will really act as a really dense ground cover. So you can see this plant has an umbel-shaped flower, so that, you know, it kind of looks like a parasol from the side. This is a member of the Apiaceae family. This family is known for attracting beneficial insects due to its very shallow flower shape, which allows a lot of different non-pollinator specialized insects like your hornets, your wasps, ladybugs, it'll draw in these beneficial insects a lot more effectively than many other flowers. And this is also an example of what we call a dynamic accumulator. So yarrow, it's a very short growing plant. The tallest I've ever seen it, maybe 2 feet tall. But for how short it grows on the surface, it actually has a very extensive root structure that gets pretty down into the soil. And the process of dynamic accumulation is the act of bringing up minerals from the subsoil and concentrating it in the topsoil. As this is a perennial, this plant will grow pretty aggressively. Like, it's not the tallest plant, but it'll produce a decent bit of biomass. The leaves will die back and they'll decay, and then they'll really add in the nutrients that it mined from the subsoil into the topsoil, which will make those nutrients more available to other plants that you might have around your garden, be it a fruit tree or annual vegetables. Also a really great flower for cut flowers. Agastache funiculum, Anacyssa. One of my favorites from an ornamental aspect, a very visually appealing plant. Really just a vibrant, I don't think this picture does it justice, a very vibrant purple bloom. And also a member of the mint family. You can see if you look close, you have the opposite leaf arrangement. If you look very, very close, you can see that this is a square stem. A couple key giveaways for mint families. What to speak of, it has pretty strong aromatic quality as well. A great plant if you want to like take a sprig off on a hot day, throw it in your water. It'll have a really nice like licorice anise flavor, which is where the name Anacyssa comes from. I don't think it has quite the herbalist applications or history as say Echinacea, but a really great plant to have around. Perennial, it'll grow maybe about 3-4 feet tall. So the Monarda genus bee balm, we talked about Monarda didyma, the scarlet bee balm, earlier. So these are two different species in the same genus. Didyma over here on the left, scarlet bee balm, and Monarda fistuliosa on the right. Another common name I've heard for this genus, other than bee balm, I've heard it called wild bergamot. So very similar to the Anacysta from the previous slide. This is a member of the mint family that the leaves have a very pleasant, almost like licorice aromatic quality, which I guess the name wild bergamot came from its aromatic similar quality to bergamot orange, which is a common component of Earl Grey tea, I believe. So other important differences between these two species, I would say that Fistulosa over here on the right, this is the species that if you ever come and see our work on the west side beltline, this is the species that I think has germinated more effectively than any other wildflower that we've sown, that we've spread the seeds of. If you are going to take that route, like, okay, well, I want to spread wildflowers on my property and I don't want to buy individual plants, I just want to spread it by seed, this is definitely one that I would recommend. It has a very high success rate. Over here on the left, going back to Monarda didyma, the scarlet bee balm, I will say compared to its cousin, it's going to be a little taller, a little more unruly. So you have that more like striking, bigger, more vibrant flower. That, and of course, that red color makes it irresistible to a lot of hummingbirds. I see a lot of hummingbirds on this species in particular. I will say the drawback is it's taller, a little more unruly than its cousin Monarda fistuliosa. Conoclinium colistinum, blue mistflower. This is a great plant to have in your repertoire. If you have a shadier part of your yard, maybe you have like a big old oak tree that's shading half of your yard, but you want to have wildflowers, this is a plant that I would definitely recommend to put. It can tolerate full sun. It can tolerate almost full shade, but a great forest edge flower, really, really tough. A lot of people will complain like, oh, this flower, it'll be weedy. If you plant it, then it'll spread all over your yard. I kind of see that as a positive. One, I've never seen it get unruly to the point where it's just too much work to maintain. And two, when you have multiple of these plants, like you see that this plant is prolifically reproducing, well, you pop it up, put it in another spot in your yard, pop one up in the springtime, give it to your friend. Like this is a very hardy plant, a very tough plant. And as you can see on the right, really great attractor for butterflies that go after that purple color. Another important thing to note, this is going to be a fall bloom. So I've just seen these start to bloom in Atlanta, maybe within the past few weeks. These bloom around the same time that you see goldenrod bloom. Speaking of goldenrod, the Solidago genus. So goldenrod, this is a genus of plants where you see a diversity of different species in the same place. I couldn't really tell you I'm the best at identifying this species versus that other species, but it's a pretty common, like this isn't a plant that you really have to go out and buy if you just want it on your property. But earlier we talked about nativars. This is a really good example of like, okay, I understand why people have cultivars of this species. Over here on the left, you have fireworks, the cultivar fireworks of goldenrod. And this, as you can see in this picture, it's a lot lower, it almost has like a bushy growth. The flower of any species in this genus is really just a remarkable, vibrant yellow golden color and is really a great insect attractor. The nectar of goldenrod is really important for a lot of migratory pollinators. Another factor linked to the drop in monarch population, not only the milkweed that we talked about earlier, but the loss of pollinator forage like goldenrod, especially in that key migratory period in the fall. A really great plant to just be up close and personal with when it's fully in bloom. One, I do want to dispel the myth that goldenrod is responsible for fall allergies. It blooms at the same time that common and giant ragweed bloom. A lot of the times they'll grow in the same area in open fields, but seeing as this is a pollinated plant, it's not going to trigger your allergies in the same way that a wind pollinated plant like ragweed will. But I love getting up with these plants when they're blooming because you just see a whole, like multiple different species of insects at one time pollinating. Moving on, we have common boneset. So this is another plant that is really a great fall bloom insect attractor. You can see this picture on the left, you have multiple different species at once. This plant will get maybe about 4 or 5 feet tall. And you see this one, I've seen this sold pretty commonly at a lot of smaller plant sales. Has a long history of herbalist applications. But I plant it for the aesthetics and the insect attraction. Wild violets in the viola genus. So I like to always use the example of planting a garden is sort of like throwing a party. You'll have the guest list, you'll have the plants that you planted that you intended on showing up. But as with any good sized party, people are just going to show up. And a lot of the times, you know, people will show up, they'll make the party rowdy, you gotta kick them out. Those are our invasive species. But every now and then you'll throw a party, someone will come that you didn't really invite, but they're bringing a 6-pack, they're having a good time, and there's no reason to kick them out. This is violets. You'll see them a lot in your lawn. They have that perforated, like heart-shaped leaf. And of course, in the springtime, early spring, they have those vibrant violet blooms. Sort of in the inverse of why goldenrod is so important for its fall season blooming, the fact that this flower is such an early bloom is important for the same reason. This is an important forage for a lot of pollinators that are just coming out of winter hibernation. And over here on the right, I showed a picture of the great spangled fritillary, and this is a species of butterfly that, in the same way that passionflower is the larval host for the Gulf fritillary, this is the only genus that this butterfly can lay its eggs on that its larva will eat. And a resource that we'll talk about later, Native Plant Finder, a subdivision of the National Wildlife Fund, it'll give you statistics for how many species of butterflies will use a certain plant as its larval host. And I want to say it's over 60 species of butterflies and moths will use, in Georgia, will use this genus as a larval host. Lobelia cardinalis, cardinal flower. Going back to sort of like how the swamp sunflower, if you have a poor drained, wet, low-lying area in your property, and so you want to have a rain garden, a great plant to include cardinal flower. Perennial, it'll come back year after year. The bloom can get maybe about 4 feet tall, not crazy tall, but as you can see, it just has those lovely, vibrant scarlet blooms. Great attractor for hummingbirds and insects of all different shape and size. Next, we have Liatris, specifically the blazing star. Sort of like how goldenrod, there's a lot of species that will be very, very tall. The Liatris genus, you have a lot of like very tall, kind of unruly species that will fall over and flop over in the late summer. This is a species that I feel like will be the easiest to incorporate into your yard design or your garden. A little more short, compact, and as you can see on the right, just vibrantly beautiful and great attractor for pollinators. And that'll get maybe about 3-4 feet tall. All right, so that's the end of our flowers. At the end, I like to add 5 grasses that I really like to talk about. In general, grasses, tall grasses specifically, are very important. Not only just going back to that at the very beginning, we talked about the importance of having that balanced meadow versus forest dichotomy to really provide the maximum biodiversity. But it's also important to have dormant tall grasses in the wintertime for a lot of our overwintering insects. So in the same reason that in your garden, you want to attract beneficial insects into your garden to eat the predators, well, the dormant grasses, this is really the habitat that they need in the wintertime to survive the cold. It's also a great thing to mention compared to turf grasses, these deep-rooted perennials, their roots penetrate so much deeper into the soil, which is great not only to make them more drought resistant, a little less dependent on watering and fertilization than your turf grass, it's also better for water infiltration to prevent flooding. It's better for your soil biology in general. And let me just go ahead and break down these species. Little bluestem, this is a species that you see a lot in my plantings in the West Side Beltline. Really has this vibrant blue, light blue, almost turquoise color in the spring, which gives way to this beautiful like bronze, purple bronze fall color. I will say a great grass to get if you are looking for having a little mini meadow in your yard. Make sure that it is in full sun. Out of all the grasses that I'll talk about here, little bluestem is going to be the pickiest. It wants full sun. This is a plant that will thrive in your Midwestern plain states, open, sunny. It has a little bit of trouble with the humidity and the shade here in Georgia. In the middle here, we have Indian grass, a little taller, a little tougher, but it has these great, just visually striking seed heads. It's going to produce a little more biomass than the little bluestem, and pretty much this is the tallest grass of all that I'm going to be talking about. So I would say use sparingly in your landscape, maybe in an area where you're fine with something 5-6 feet tall growing. Over here on the right, pink muhly grass. This is a grass that you see more commonly used in conventional landscaping than I think any of the other grasses that we'll talk about. A lot of y'all might recognize that you have this vibrant fall coloring of the seed heads, which is this stark pink. And this plant will get maybe about 3-4 feet tall, and it's a really great plant for borders, or if you just want to have dense plantings to where in the fall you just have that cloud, that ocean cloud of pink on your landscape. All right, so the last two that I'm going to talk about, Chasmanthium latifolium, wood oats. So in the same vein that the blue mist flower we talked about earlier, this is a great plant to plant in a shady, maybe an open woodland area in your yard. Wood oats, common name also known as like river oats. There's a few different common names. This is a woodland riparian, like wetland species. You see this a lot in forested wetlands. And really just like, I think it has a very stark visual appeal. You could see the seeds, but also it has this dense growth that outcompetes a lot of other would-be woodland invasive species. Really great to incorporate into your yard, maybe as like a border and more of a shaded area. And last but not least, we have purple love grass, another grass that you'll commonly see planted if you take a stroll on the West Side Beltline. The lowest growing out of all the grasses I'll be talking about. And for that reason, I think is the most effective border plant. Like if you say you want to have plants that will form a border like on a walk path, really, really good species. In the same vein that the muhly grass sums up that fluffy pink seed head in the fall, purple love grass will do the same. And really, really just a very versatile grass to incorporate into your landscape. All right, so that begs the big question, where to find these native plants? I definitely believe for every species I just mentioned and just listed, no doubt you can go on the internet, you can find seeds, you can find wildflower seeds for these species, and definitely a viable option. I will say a lot of people get disappointed. Wildflower seeds, they're not really like your tomatoes or your peas where you put them in water, you put in the ground, bam, they sprout. A lot of these seeds, especially of our perennials, they need what we call stratification. They need that process of heat and cold that normally they would get through the winter so that they time their germination correctly. A lot of the times you'll see people will throw out wildflower seeds into their garden and they'll say, oh, well, nothing happened. But in the next year, they'll see the stuff popping up. So I will say, if you go the route of direct seed broadcast, don't lose hope after a year. Don't even lose hope after 2 years. Sometimes it'll take multiple years for these plants to germinate. But I will also provide a disclaimer: if you are going to go the route of direct broadcasting, there's going to be a lot of weeding in your future. So that ties me into, it's definitely, if you want to have that instant, like the simplicity and the instant visual appeal, I would go for buying these plants already as starts. You can plug them in exactly where you want. Obviously, it's going to be a little more expensive depending on how much seed you buy. The seed can be pretty expensive too, but it's the route that I would advise. So of course, I'll have the shameless plug for the Trees Atlanta plant sale. We're actually just at the tail end of our conventional plant sale right now, but if I'm not mistaken, we will have a second chance plant sale. I'm going to butcher the date, but we can ask Michelle about this at the end of the presentation. She'll definitely give us the dates at the Carter Center, I believe.
Yeah, I'll be adding that into the chat.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle. Another great nonprofit, Wild Center. They have plant sales all throughout the year. You can find a lot of the species I talked about. Earlier in the presentation, I mentioned the nwf.org Native Plant Finder function. Really cool website under the National Wildlife Federation. You type in your zip code and it'll give you a rank of all the wildflowers in your area that support this many number of specialized larval hosts, et cetera. Really, really cool resource. Community Foodscapes, if you're looking for someone not only to buy these plants from, but they also do installation, a really cool organization I have a history with. Good people, would recommend them. And then on the bottom right, Chattahoochee Nature Center. I've never actually been to their plant sale, but I've heard really good things. And yeah, that's about all I got for y'all. So right now I'll give y'all a little more time. I can see that we have a few questions already asked. Let's go ahead and submit those. And Michelle, if you want to help me out there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Sam. We definitely enjoy the analogy in between like the party and a garden.
I use that one a lot. I like that one too.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of like sticking in our minds here. Definitely very, very interested in everything. What's your favorite plant?
Out of all those that I just listed, my favorite overall, I'm just going to say Echinacea, because I mean, it's definitely the most just charismatic, very beautiful, very great for attracting especially native bees, multiple different applications for it if you want to go the herbalist route. And it's an easy plant to just kind of like fit into your landscape wherever you need.
And I also wanted to mention that the sale that we're hosting right now, it's our tree sales. We have a few plants in there as well, but in April is when we have our native plant sale. So that's where we bring all of these variety of plants that I'm mentioning here.
Yeah, you're totally right. There is going to be a bigger selection of, especially like the wildflowers I've noticed in our spring sale. But I just recently checked the inventory. There's a few of the grasses. I think all of the grasses I talked about will be available for sale.
Great, yeah, and we are hosting our sales have two parts. So we started them virtually, and you have the option to pick them up in our facilities. Mm-hmm. And then we have the second option, which is the in-person sale, and that's the one that's going on that we're promoting right now.
Awesome. Looks like I got a question from Denise. I'm thinking about a butterfly garden. How beneficial is one, and when is the best time to start one? So I'll just work backwards. The best time to start one, I would say your window is going to be starting pretty much right now. You can see if you're in Atlanta like we are, we just had, cold front come in, temperatures drop. Now is the time where we're going to have our cooler, wetter weather. And I would say that window will extend I would say until like the mid springtime, where those cooler, rainy temperatures or the cooler, rainy weather is still here with us. I've definitely even seen people, you can still plant in midsummer. It's just your plants are going to have a little more mortality. They're going to be a little needier in terms of watering. You want to put them in the ground now so they kind of have time to get their roots settled. They'll be a little more durable by the summer. I will say it also depends on if you're going to be transplanting, like you're going to buy your little potted plant and then plug them into the ground. You're going to have a big window for that. For if you're going to be like broadcasting the seed, now is also a really good time. Going back to how I talked about the need for stratification, if you're going to be doing wildflower seed, you never want to do that in the early summer. You want to do that when you still have those cold temperatures. But going back to your question, how beneficial is one? I would say it depends on what you have planted. And I think that a lot of people will plant, say like, oh, I want to bring the butterflies into my yard. Let me plant rosemary or this one, you know, conventional flower that I got from Home Depot that's actually native to southeastern China. That's all well and good. There is function in providing nectar for generalist pollinators. But the most important thing, I mean, that's kind of what I've been talking about the whole time. The most important thing you can do is plant plants that these pollinators, like butterflies, will use to as a larval host. So the most important thing you can plant for Georgia, plant your milkweeds, the Asclepias genus. I love, once again, the passion vine. That's another good one where you can just like almost always in Atlanta, you'll see the caterpillars on this plant. Kind of like a trick answer. If you want like a really low maintenance way to have a very positive impact on butterfly populations, moth populations, plant a native oak. That's really the native plant finder website function. It'll give you like the number of species of your butterflies and moths that will use a plant as a host. Oak, for a lot of oak species, the number is like 200 plus. I think sunflowers and goldenrod, they're going to be like 80 different species, which is great. But I think, I mean, once again, going back to our strategy on the West Side Beltline, we have the balance of those native trees with the pollinator forage, like the flowers. I think an important aspect of a butterfly garden would be those native trees, native oaks.
And Sam, if you were mentioning Doug Tallamy earlier, he did a book on oaks, and he mentions why all the caterpillars, like why the oaks are great.
I want to say I haven't read it. Is it like The Nature of Oaks, I think was the title?
Yeah. If you visit our website, our YouTube channel, we did and we participated in an interview with him, and the recording is there. Yes.
Definitely. Cool. I'll give a little more time if anyone has any other questions. And if not, I'd just like to take this time again. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all for joining me. Something I'm really, really glad I get to just talk about this and get paid for it. Really thankful for the Trees Atlanta organization as a whole.
Yeah, thank you, Sam, for your time. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. We hope to see you in the next presentation.
Cool. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Have a good day, Sam.